Hey everyone, we're back with a new More Layers. I'm Seth Mariano.
And I'm Jordan Smith.
The same day that the Super Bowl occurred was the same day that Jordan's mom returned home from a trip with her folks in Florida.
Yep, she went to go see them, and she spent about a week, I believe, there, maybe like 8 or 9 days. Everyone's doing all right. Uh, I will definitely say the weather was certainly a lot better bringing her back than when we first dropped her off at the airport because it was early in the morning and we got hit by a massive snowstorm. It was still going, so we had to move really slow. And I spent a good chunk of the morning after I got back home shoveling until one of our neighbors kind of helped me out. And then when I went to go get her the day of the Super Bowl, it was significantly better.
All right, well, you watched the Super Bowl?
I did, yeah. It was one that it wasn't really that bad. I mean, I wasn't as excited because I didn't have heavy interest in either team that was in it, but I still felt like it was watchable because there was no team or player that I disliked. And then the halftime show came around, and I know a lot of people loved it, and I didn't necessarily hate it, but it just didn't really grab me, excite me, or anything. I was just bored.
I was I don't know. I guess this is my reaction to concerts in general, but I was pretty bored myself watching it.
Okay. Yeah, I've been to some live concerts and such before, and those were fun. But for whatever reason, this one just didn't grab me.
I haven't gone to as many, I don't think, as the next person, but I have. I can't say that I have been to any crappy ones though.
I mean, I've only been to two up to this point, and again, both of them were still very exciting.
Yeah, I did enjoy the game, and
Mhm.
and though I'm not technically a fan, I wouldn't consider myself a fan of either team. I did uh, feel a partiality toward the Bengals because they've never won it, and because of my brother and I's mutual friends' roots in Cincinnati.
Okay.
Yeah. So I did feel crushed when they lost, but
It was
yeah,
still pretty
yeah, but
close.
yeah, I would say that it is probably the best, no, most competitive, most exciting Super Bowl that I've seen my whole life.
Yeah, that's the thing. Granted, you certainly would want your team to win or the one that you like more to win. But if they're just blowing out the other team by 20, 30 points or whatever, it's not that exciting because you pretty much know what's going to happen by that point unless one team really screws up.
Yeah. So anyway, for those who are new to this series, we have put in place a new format where the big part of it is a sort of table talk discussion. We have a series of questions, discussion questions about one big topic that we decided on beforehand,
Hmm.
and the one for this time is Christian movies. We'll jump right into the big topic portion of the day.
Hmm.
Again, again related to Christian movies. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I had a few questions I wrote down, and the first one I put down was, it seems that many people, including many Christians, are indifferent toward Christian films. What do you think are the biggest issues these movies tend to have?
Which was definitely a good question to start with. And honestly, the biggest and most common thing I see people saying when it comes to these types of films is that some, not all, but some of them can come across a little too quote unquote preachy, in that their message is so blatantly obvious that it just comes across a little forced. And most people who, for example, are not Christian, they don't like Christian values being forced down their throat.
I had a few bullet points, and at least a couple of which were similar to what you just said. Forced messages, in parentheses, I put filmmakers using a scenario that feels less than real to desperately try to make a point about something they think is super important to hear or think about, and as a result, the message feels more obvious than natural.
Right. That's another way to reiterate the same point. It can feel unnatural in that it comes across too much. Like, you still want to have that important message in there or important lesson, but you don't want to like shove it in people's faces.
And I also put down outcomes that are too convenient, or everything turning out happy, or the way everyone wants in the end. That was another thing I wrote.
Which I definitely agree. I mean, a lot of movies will do the whole happy ending thing, and this can be apparent in Christian films. So I definitely understand where that's coming from.
Yeah.
The next thing I wrote was that some of them might depict a character. I haven't really thought of too many examples for this one, or really any off the top of my head, but I've seen people say this with some films where they feel some of them might depict a character in the story who isn't Christian or believes in God as a sort of evil or antagonistic character, which in real life isn't always the case. Because sometimes a person who does claim to be Christian or believe in God is nasty to other people, and then the person who doesn't is actually pretty nice. And then the third and final thing that I wrote for this particular question is that I've come to find that there were a good handful of movies that are based on stories found in the Bible that will twist the story to their liking just to make it different or interesting. There was a movie that came out a few years ago. I think it was simply called Noah, based on the story of Noah in the Bible. Now, the book of Noah is relatively short, and it covers very little outside of the ark and the flood itself. So anytime someone wants to tell this story, they typically have to take some liberties, as people normally do in a film. However, with this particular film, there were a few who have said that they took too many liberties and it strayed way too far from the source material.
Probably for that reason, if not for that and other reasons, if that's not the only one, I think I would advise people to, if you're gonna watch something like that, like even I was thinking about what my dad said when the Mark Burnett series, The Bible. Oh, remember that one?
Vaguely.
Oh, yeah, well, when that came out, my dad pretty much said, be careful, don't treat this as a replacement for reading scripture.
Right.
I think people like him and myself would argue, watch it and carefully contrast it with what's actually in scripture, because there may be some differences that need to be addressed.
Exactly. And one film that I will bring up a little bit later that I feel did take some liberties from the original story, but still stayed true to the main plot of said story, was The Prince of Egypt, which tells the story of Moses up until the point where he gets the Ten Commandments. Like, it focused a lot on what Moses and Ramesses' brother-like relationship could have been, but it still stays true to how the story went in the Bible. They even say at the beginning of the film, before the movie even technically starts, hey, we understand that we're taking some liberties here and there when telling this story, but we still tried to remain faithful to the source material.
And then I also wrote down lack of empathy, much more prevalence of judgmentalism and or aggression, and generalizations about people and things. One thing I suppose I could say about that, at least off the top of my head, is, well, that is, I'd say if that's how you're conducting or writing your movie with a Christian purpose, it's whether you realize it or not, it's not the most Christ-like approach, because I was just thinking not too long prior to this recording about there's a verse in Hebrews about Christ being that great high priest who can empathize with us.
Mhm. I feel like it's probably happening more than we realize, because we probably wouldn't have seen every single Christian movie out there, but yeah, I still get what you're saying.
Part of the reason why I suppose a lot of Christian films are written the way they are is because so many of people in those sort of evangelical or Christian type communities are trained to think, like, not that I don't agree with it, but they're trained to think that that there's only one legitimate truth, and I do agree with that there's one God and only one truth really at the end of the day, but when that is dwelt on too extremely, it becomes these movies that aren't effective as they should be, I don't think.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so let's move on to the second question. What are some specific Christian movies that you think, in terms of teaching messages about God and Christianity, did more harm than good?
All right, so for this question, I didn't list any specific examples, but I kind of circle back to the idea of all of the different Bible movies misrepresenting the source material, such as Noah, which risks making our faith sometimes look bad to other groups or faiths, because it's like, if they tell the story in a certain way and these people who don't believe the same things we do see this, they could get the wrong information and be like, wow, is their faith really like this? I don't want to be a part of that.
The first specific example, I put down a few. The first one that I wrote down was the famous Kendrick Brothers picture, Facing the Giants. I'm basing this technically not on my knowledge of the movie itself technically, but on the novelization that I have a copy of in my room. You know, there's a struggling school football team, and the main couple is failing to conceive a child. There's some car trouble. There's a problem in the home with a rodent or something.
Right.
And then they come to this attitude, we've got to trust and honor God more intentionally than we have. And then in the end, everything works out the way they had dreamt. Everything works out the way they would prefer it. It becomes so rosy that I think it runs the risk of sending the misleading message that if you do X, Y, Z, if you do and say all the right things, then if you're living for Jesus, everything's going to go how you would personally prefer it to.
Well, here's what I got to say about that.
All
like,
right.
I definitely understand where you're coming from with that. The biggest problem I feel like that movie has is not necessarily that it's a Christian film, but because it's a sports film. Because what I mean by this is there are several different sports films, especially when it comes to football, that has a team from somewhere, whether they're known or not, that just is not doing well. And then some plot point plot device comes along. In this case, it's their faith in God, which rejuvenates their motivation, that will suddenly turn the team around and pull off a miracle. So if facing the Giants is not the only one by a long shot to do something like that, but it stands out because of the messages they put in with it.
Yeah, and I put down just one last example of, this is a film that, I tried finding out more basic detail about on the internet when I was preparing for this, but it's not really easy to find, and I couldn't really identify the production company behind it. The internet wouldn't really tell me. But I can tell you it was released in 2010, and it was simply titled, What Would Jesus Do? Yep. Overall, it seemed to be like almost like a series of old as Christianity cliches littered throughout, and like the musician not refusing to do a certain song because he doesn't agree with it. But one problem is they don't even show what's wrong with it. All you see is him looking at the paper. You don't see anything that's on it, and he's like, "No, I'm not doing it." And so it felt like it felt less than effective for one reason.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I thought about this just now, the discriminating rich person who slowly warms up to this poor person who has next to nothing, and as one plot point. And then then there's the whole debate against this politician, and they're saying he's going to spread hopelessness. He's going to they don't really get into much specifics about what's wrong with his campaign. It seems like it was light on logical, followable writing, and a lot heavier on old cliches and such.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen this movie personally, so I'm for now going to take your word for it.
But I think both of us would agree that not all Christian films are overall bad.
No.
And this next question is, are there any examples of Christian films you think were good, and why or why not? I wrote down a few. Did you write some yourself?
Yeah, I wrote down a handful, and I think some of the ones that I wrote down are also ones that you wrote down. And I think the first one I wrote down after that is one I think you also wrote down, which was Passion of the Christ.
Yes. So you and I think would both agree on that one.
And I will say, anyone who hasn't seen this movie, it does cover the story of Jesus dying on the cross and being resurrected. I will say it does not pull any punches. It is brutal.
It doesn't hold back. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm saying. And while people who are more sensitive to that kind of material may not be able to sit through a movie like that, I will at least say that because it doesn't pull any punches, it really puts into perspective exactly what Jesus would have gone through to save his people.
And the world as a whole, pretty much.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. A lot of people might naturally assume that autistic people like the two of us would not be able to realistically keep our eyes on visuals that are so graphic. Like for one thing, when the soldiers or whoever are whipping Jesus with the scourge that literally rips the skin off of him, which is a graphic image even if you don't visually see it in and of itself, in a way. But in a way, I think I think it works. And I really didn't much, if at all, um, feel any tension or any bothered feelings with it, if much, if at all, because uh, I don't know. Maybe it was because I was so focused on the significance of what Christ was allowing himself to endure,
Right.
and because it was depicted in such a violent and, I guess, graphic way, it really makes the significance of what he did for us really sink in a potentially powerful way.
Right. I think the one scene I was able to keep my eyes open for most of the film. I think the one moment I turned my head away was the moment they were putting the nails in his hands.
Yeah. And I do think Passion of the Christ, even though some may argue it's a story from a Catholic point of view rather than a Christian Protestant point of view, I do, believe that it has a lot of respectable artistic qualities about it. The scoring, the post production work, the cinematography. It's all executed to such a strong extent that it really conveys the drama, the seriousness, and the significant impact of these events, and uh, and really the significance of the cross itself.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. And if you like This Is Us, you might appreciate this because the way that the film is set up, the narrative or whatever the word is, it flashes back and forth between what's going on in the present time, Jesus' final hours, his arrest and the crucifixion, all that stuff that's going on. It flashes back and forth between that stuff and some other events earlier in his ministry, like the Sermon on the Mount and other events.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Do you remember that? And then the film Fireproof.
Now I think Fireproof may be the one Kendrick film I haven't seen all the way through yet.
But have you seen most of it?
I want to say I've seen clips. I don't remember which scenes, but I know I've seen snippets, but I don't remember seeing the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, I have seen the whole thing, and I think it's a more believably written, gently evangelical, and more realistically written story, right, compared to other stuff I've probably seen. And one example of something that they did right, I think, that I maybe want to highlight at least real quick, is after the male lead, the husband, has come to the conclusion that he's gone wrong also.
Mhm.
It hasn't just been his wife, that he's messed up too in his marriage, and he starts making genuine efforts out of genuine love to achieve reconciliation with her, and then he eventually apologizes for how he's hurt her, or been a crappy husband. Most people, and I probably felt the same way when I saw that scene, most people probably would have expected everything to be all rosy and okay, and the wife to just break down and give him a hug or something and say, I forgive you, or whatever. But the way it's written, though, it's not that easy a resolution. There
Okay.
is an eventual resolution. They do eventually reconcile, but she doesn't just go ahead and say everything's okay. Instead, she says, well, I need some time to think about this, which I think is a more realistic way because, well, like I said before, you can do and say all the right stuff, but it's not going to guarantee the outcome is going to go that well.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I thought that's one of the things that they did right with that one.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to watch this movie at some point.
Yeah. And one other thing I think they did right was it was told from multiple points of view, both the wife and the husband. And you could see where each of them was coming from, and you could see where they were both going wrong. Like she's got kind of a temper on her, and is kind of bratty, but he's more self-focused and wanting stuff for himself and often not being very caring. And so they both have legitimate reasons to be mad at each other, and you can clearly see, like, you can get a deep dig into what each person is feeling and experiencing. So that's another thing I think they did right.
Okay.
Yeah. And then this is a more recent one, and I watched once the whole way through and saw at least the third act of it again more recently while I was away for Thanksgiving on television. I Can Only Imagine, which I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I have actually seen that movie, yes.
Yeah. Yep. So this is the story of MercyMe band member Bart Millard and his restored relationship with his dad Arthur, and the events that led up to him writing the pretty much ever immortalized Christian song of the same name, I Can Only Imagine.
Which I guess in the film they stated he wrote in about 10-15 minutes.
Which may be an artistic license, and I guess a lot of people commenting on it have questioned whether or not that's accurate, but I say big deal.
Yeah, it's not like it's going to change anything one way or the other if he did or not.
Yeah. But like Fireproof, I think this movie did a decent job, at least, of acknowledging that, you can do and say all the right things, but it's not going to work out at all but it's not guaranteed to work out, at least not that easily. Like when
Right.
when Arthur is showing repentance and trying to make peace, make things right with his son, you can tell, you can get a sense that Bart is still not over the pain. He's not over the resentment, and he has not been able to trust him quite yet. And sometimes things like that take time, and this movie did a good job of acknowledging that.
Yeah, they didn't make it so that they resolved everything on their first confrontation. They had multiple times where they interacted and it did not go very well, but they each kind of slowly lowered their guard towards the other in a way that felt natural. Thus, the relationship, once they did start to reconcile, it felt believable.
And then the only one I put down, I don't know if people would categorize this as a Christian movie, most of them, but I would probably describe it as one, because it is the life story pretty much of a Christian media figure. And it's a movie called Ragamuffin, which in a way has, well, fun fact, in a way this has a sort of special connection to me, sort of, because of a fun fact that my brother, who studied music at a college in Ohio, actually did a workshop, a capstone program in Nashville, where one of his teachers was a member of the Ragamuffin band, Rick Elias.
Oh.
Yeah. It's the biggest thing that I think that is respectable or admirable about it is how they wrote Rich himself, how they presented him as, a person who was pretty evidently a person of faith, but at the same time, he had his struggles. He had his wrestling matches with God, if you will.
Okay.
And there was a very human, a pretty broken, traumatized, emotionally unstable dimension to him. You do see him being brave and speaking out against what he thinks is not theologically true, and you see him making vulnerable songs expressing his feelings and his struggles, and you see, well, a lot into his personal life, and how far from sunshiny it is, how it's not perfect, it's complicated, but you do see him, to an extent, leaning into God for strength, and wrestling, and seemingly trying to overcome.
All right. Do you know, at least generally, when this movie came out?
No, I really don't. I know I have watched it a couple times. I don't know if I ever really got the release date. I think it was sometime in the 2010s.
Okay.
I also felt like there was one movie or another that wasn't necessarily a Christian movie or made with a Christian mission or motivation or goal, but in a way they still conveyed some messages that are consistent enough with what God would say. And so I wrote this question: can you think of any non-Christian films that had strong biblical parallels or were, in a way, more biblical than some Christian films?
Which was a very interesting question to answer, and I really had to think about it. But the answer I ultimately came up with were the books or even the films covering the Chronicles of Narnia. Now, a lot of people, they may not think right away that there are that many biblical parallels, but there actually are a few more than people may think. Like in The Magician's Nephew, which is the first book in the series, is the creation of Narnia, which parallels the creation of our universe. And the last battle is the other way. It's where it all ends. But I think the one biblical parallel that people will recognize more than most, especially if they've seen the movie, is the whole idea of Aslan giving up his life for the sake of another, and then him being resurrected from the dead.
Yeah, that may be the most famous example of something not exactly marketed as Christian media, but still very, but with some Christian truth woven in it, whether by accident or design. I wrote quite a few, and the first one that came to my mind was, this was specifically the 2000s version of the movie Cheaper by the Dozen, starring Steve Martin.
It's been a while since I've seen that movie.
Yeah, I think you told me that before.
Yeah, I think the one scene I remember from that film is when they soaked a guy's clothes in meat.
They soaked his underwear in raw meat.
Okay, that was it. Yeah.
Yeah, Ashton Kutcher's character, and then the dog pretty much attacked him, chewing on him.
Yep.
Yeah. There's this story that runs throughout the movie of Steve Martin's character wanting more than he's had in a long time. Yeah, he gets this job as a Division I head football coach, and he's trying throughout the movie to juggle that with his personal family life. Things get pretty much out of hand. Things get really chaotic, and after some reflecting, spoiler alert, at the end, and he pretty much decides, I can't have both. My family is more important to me than this. I am going to quit this job when the season is over. Yeah, and I think that's a good biblical message, because I think sometimes things that really count require some personal, and maybe inconvenient sacrifice. And I think there are some specific scriptures, like the one about, hating your family by comparison, not literally, but by comparison, in order to follow Jesus, and other scriptures that I'd have to think probably longer to remember. But I do believe that the Bible teaches, in order to have things that really count, you may have to let go of something.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. And then I put down a lesser known movie, Parental Guidance, starring Billy Crystal, and how this guy who's a radio announcer for minor league baseball, that's Crystal's character, he's trying he's trying to achieve his dream of announcing for major league games, and the film mostly shows him struggling to get there, but that in like the finale of the movie, they trick you, with like an extreme cut-in close-up shot. They trick you into thinking, oh, he did it. He got his dream, because he says like, I've been waiting 35 years to say this or something like that. And then they slowly zoom out to reveal, oh no, it's not a major league game like he wanted. It's actually a kid's ball game. And so,
okay. But he still made steps in the right direction.
Well, I do appreciate that from a biblical perspective, I guess, because he didn't necessarily get the dream he'd been chasing, but he's still nonetheless happy where he's at.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, out of curiosity, what was this movie rated?
I think it might have been a PG, but I'm not totally sure.
I mean, if that's the case, then it's kind of funny because they always say PG means parental guidance suggested.
Well, so have you seen the film yourself?
I have not.
Yeah. And so the next one I wrote down was a movie I imagine a lot of you have seen. And Jordan, I don't know if you've seen it, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood.
If that's the one with Tom Hanks, I have not seen that yet.
That is, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I suppose, for one thing, I could appreciate it from a biblical perspective because a similar reason that I said for I Can Only Imagine, reconciliation not coming that easy, like I said when I talked about that one. And probably the biggest biblical value that I could probably see in this movie was the power of positive influence. You meet the magazine writer who's the guy who in the story, where he goes on assignment to interview Mr. Rogers. He's angry at his dad for whatever way he's hurt him, and the way Mr. Rogers is presented, it's a very nice model example of maybe how we ought to, as Christians, communicate with those who might not be at that faith point. Like Lloyd, who's the magazine writer, is presented as rather cynical and kind of bitter. And Mr. Rogers is presented as pretty compassionate and very, very soft-spoken and patient and loving. And over time, I think you can see that slowly start to rub off on Lloyd.
Okay.
It's like the scripture verse you probably read, bad company corrupts good character. Well, if that is so, and I do believe, because it's in the Bible, it is so, I believe the opposite is equally true.
Oh, yeah, it can definitely go both ways.
Yeah. And then I put A Boy Named Charlie Brown, which is the first ever animated feature-length movie based on the Peanuts comic strip.
I don't know if I've even heard of that one, let alone seen it.
Yeah.
I, of course, know about all the holiday specials, but I don't remember that one.
Yeah. It's one that I've seen at least a couple times in my childhood. And I thought back to that movie. I remembered seeing an article somebody wrote contrasting the messages of a Disney animated movie called Planes with the message of A Boy Named Charlie Brown. And basically the argument the writer was saying was Planes pretty much is saying, like, you don't have to do any hard work or do any training to get to the career or whatever you want to get to. You can just dream it and do it. It's simple as that, which he said he didn't agree with. But what he said he liked about A Boy Named Charlie Brown was that, if I remember the article right, Charlie Brown worked hard, studied hard to prepare for this big national spelling bee, and yet, when he competed, he ended up coming up short. He ended up losing. And then I thought of the first couple movies based on the first couple of Shiloh books. Well, this is the story of a young abused beagle who belongs to an abusive hunting guy. And a couple times after being beat on by his owner, he runs away, and goes running to this young kid. And the second time that happens, and he secretly keeps him in a little shelter up on the hill, a little ways from his house, and secretly takes care of him. And then eventually, when he is caught, his secret is found out. And his dad's all upset and pretty much repeating the argument. You can't do that. That dog's not yours. What? And Marty, who's the son, is pretty much going back. Well, that owner is being cruel to him. He's not safe where he's at.
All right.
Yeah. And so that story, I think that the way it's written, it really touches both sides. Like, is there ever a point when doing what is technically the right thing? Is there ever a time when you should or can or have to break the rule? It does kind of reminded me as I thought about it of like Pharisees and how strict they were to religious law in a way.
And a film that I thought of when you said that was a film called One Night with the King, which is one of the few films I've been able to find, aside from the VeggieTales adaptation, oddly enough, that has covered the story of Esther.
Yeah.
And
I'm not familiar with that one.
It's definitely a good one. I strongly recommend it. And the whole plot point that stands out based on what you were saying was how she had to break the rule of walking into the king's court uninvited, because usually if you do that, you're dead unless he sticks out his staff signifying that they're safe.
Or he could just punish you by exile, I think.
Something like that, yeah. So she essentially had to break the rules knowing it could cost her her life in order to try and save her own people.
Yeah. Then there was the follow-up, the first sequel called Shiloh Season, which was the next book and eventual movie. And that one was focused. That story is focused more on, I think, a message of forgiveness and moving on past the resentment that the main boy and his family, or at least his family, might be feeling toward this abusive hunter guy, Judd Travers. And I didn't actually read the book technically, but I did watch the movie more than once. And there's this third act plot, which is where things kind of have slowly come full circle at that point. And what happens is, and it's refreshing, what happens is the dog is barking out to get Marty's attention, and the dog leads him to the scene of a truck accident, and it's Judd's truck, and he's injured and probably pathed out.
Oh,
And and what the kid does, at least in the movie, he calls the rescue squad. An ambulance takes him to the hospital, and the scene that stuck out for me when I was thinking about it leading up to this episode is, and I'm not sure what the kid believes, what the character believes, but you see him sit up, and it's up and looks and sounds like he is praying, help help Judd get well, physically and in his head. And I think there's a parallel in there. I think of when Jesus said, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Sometimes you may have to confront a bad thing that they did, but still, we're called to love them, and pray for them, I believe.
exactly.
And then, and I did think of one slight biblical parallel. I don't know how strong it is, but Bohemian Rhapsody, which is the Oscar-winning biopic of Queen and Freddie Mercury.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw it.
I haven't. I actually intended to when it came out, but I think something came up that ended up preventing me from doing so. I don't remember what, but in the end, I still have not seen it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the one parallel that I saw is that there's this plot point about Freddie, the frontman of the group, becoming bored with what he perceives, at least, as a repetitive routine for the band. Making albums, touring, doing the whole thing all over again. And so he gets to a point where he's sick of it. He decides he wants to start going solo. And then, and then things kind of go downhill, at least professionally for him and medically. He, the solo thing doesn't go so well, I guess. And at one point, he is diagnosed with AIDS. And then the opportunity to perform at Live Aid comes along, and he decides, I need to reconcile with my band. I think I was wrong to turn my back on them. I've got to get back together with them, and let's do this Live Aid charity thing and help some people.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got a small list of movies I got to check out now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had just one last question here, and it's, what biblical and or Christian stories would you maybe like to see told on the big screen that have probably yet to be told?
Well, I would certainly like to see a better adaptation of the story of Noah. But the first one I wrote down is since there have already been at least one or two animated ones, I would personally love to see a live action movie. I don't know if there is one and I just have plain missed it, but I'd love to see a live action version telling the story of Joseph.
Well, there is that musical, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which, fun fact, was I was going to say the first production that Artists Unlimited did, which is the organization we're part of, but I'm not sure if that's accurate, but they did do it early on.
I do believe it was their first one they ever did. And the first year that I joined, I believe it was their 10-year anniversary, so they figured, let's do it again.
Yeah, a lot of musicals have been adapted for the screen, so there's a chance there is one out there. I don't know how theologically accurate the story itself is, but there may be an adaptation of that musical in live action film form or not. I don't know.
Well, if there isn't, I hope somebody makes one and does it justice.
Or maybe like an archival recording like Disney did with Hamilton or something.
Maybe something like that. That'd be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then I also wrote that I'd like to see one covering the story of Samson.
Right. Right. In the Book of Judges.
Right. And for those who don't know, Samson was a guy who, like, I don't know if they really specified how long his hair was, but like he was known to have the hair, and at the same time he had strength that was beyond what the average human could ever do.
And when his birth was foretold, I believe the angel or whoever said that it should never be cut because there's some divine power in it. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think it was something like that. I mean, you could still say that God gave him his power, and by cutting his hair, it broke some
Power.
connection between him and God, whatever. But yeah, eventually his hair gets cut and he loses his strength. And I think it said his eyes were gouged out. And then
Yeah, at one point, I believe that did happen.
Right, and then his last act, he was chained or some sort of bondage to a couple of pillars, and he was like, "Okay, God, I would like to have one more moment of incredible strength," and he got it, and he used it to take the pillars down, which took a bunch of people and himself out.
Yeah, so there's a potential, I think, maybe for a good cinematic redemption story there.
Right, and if it ends with him giving his life to pull that amazing feat off, it could be a moment in a movie giving it a sort of bittersweet ending.
Maybe.
Yeah, so that it's not all sunshine and rainbows.
Just like real life, whether you're Christian or not. It's
Yeah.
not all that.
Exactly.
Yeah. I considered maybe listing examples of people that aren't necessarily in the Bible specifically, but have had a Christian platform. But all I could think of was biblical people specifically, and the first one I wrote was Solomon. Now, there may be a movie out there about him that maybe I don't know about, but just in case, I decided to write this one down or I guess in a way, for a similar reason why you listed Samson, because of his down and up redemption arc or story. If you know Solomon's life story, he was committed to God. He was a person of godly reason, but he also made some foolish decisions like having multiple wives and getting into some wild behavior. And then, but then at the end of his life, or toward the end of it, that is when he wrote the famous biblical book Ecclesiastes and reflected on the decisions and the significance of them, and pretty much wrote this book, you could say, to warn his readers, don't make these foolish decisions like I did, and ended on, in a way, a high note because of that.
Yeah, maybe not everything was perfect for him, but he was still able to turn himself around despite a lot of the issues he had.
There was one other biblical figure that probably isn't as famous or read from as much, but nonetheless, I think a worthy choice. And I have a feeling there probably has not been a movie made about him ever. It's the prophet Habakkuk, something like that.
I want to say it's Habakkuk, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. Oh well. It's a short book, the book that bears his name, but there's a sort of central theme in it about communicating honestly with God, feelings of frustration about circumstances, because, well, there's this dialogue log one-on-one back and forth between him and God that runs through most of the short text of it.
Mhm.
And where a big chunk of it is Habakkuk is saying, I hate what's going on here. Why is all this going on? And this doesn't seem right. And God pretty much at one point says, as you don't have to be discouraged. It's all going to work out in the end.
Okay, yeah, I could definitely see that as a movie.
And I listed one more, the story of John the Baptist, who's probably more famous, and maybe there's something out there about him, but who knows? He called a king or somebody out on having a romantic relationship with a wife who had been married to his brother, and boldly calling him out on that. And in response to that I think it was the woman he had married and his daughter who made the decision to fatally cut his head off.
Okay.
Yeah. Now that may be a depressing story for some, but it does in a way, it can serve as a good reminder of, it's not always gonna work out easy or favorable, but sometimes, I think it's worth it.
Yeah. And I don't know if they'd ever show a shot of his head actually being sliced off or anything, but it could do what some films do, like, say, Star Wars 3 when Anakin kills Dooku by slicing his head off. Like, you don't see the head coming off, but you see the body fall to the ground afterwards. So maybe they could at least imply it and then find some way to visualize just his head later. I'm not entirely sure.
In a way, you could, I think, show the aftermath of the attack. Maybe show, maybe show his dead body or something.
Yeah, like even some animes out there that, especially the ones that get a little bit more graphic, there will be characters who might lose limbs or their head or whatever, and they won't show it actually happening, but it'll show the person after it takes place. Like, there are some characters in Dragon Ball who might lose an arm, and you won't necessarily see the full view of that happening, but you'll see them reacting to it after the fact. Actually, one that just came to my mind where they might be able to do something maybe similar is based on the stop motion movie Chicken Run.
Oh, I remember that movie.
Yeah, and there was a scene where they found one of the chickens wasn't producing eggs anymore, so they figured there was no use for it. And they take him, or her, I guess, into the room where the chicken's head would be cut off. You see the axe, you see the shadow of the person about to bring the axe down, but you never actually see them do it. All you hear is the sound of the axe hitting the stone or whatever they were resting the chicken on, and that was it. But you know exactly what they did.
Yeah, you know enough.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. All right. I think this has been a pretty good discussion. I did have, I don't know if you came up with anything for game time, but I did come up with a little something kind of original.
Okay. Yeah, I struggled to think of anything for this one, honestly.
That's fine, no problem. But I did come up with a little simple, straightforward concept. Basically, I thought up a lot of a lot of defunct advertising slogans that I remember from my past.
Okay.
So I'm going to tell you a slogan that is no longer in use, and you try and name, I mean, whatever company or good or service or whatever it was used for, and
Okay.
and I'll give you some clues to help you.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. And so the first one, we're looking for a restaurant chain,
Yeah.
and the slogan, the old retired slogan is, "We love to see you smile."
Okay. I definitely have heard that one before. And given that they had that theme for a while of smiling, I want to say, at least as an initial guess, that it would have been McDonald's.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. All right. Next one, soft drink, and the slogan is "Joy of Cola."
Well, I don't want to say Coca-Cola because that sounds like it'd be too easy.
Yeah, this is a drink that has been famously advertised by uh, Kanye West, Britney Spears, Michael Jackson, Ray Charles.
See, my next guess, especially after you said Michael Jackson, would have been Pepsi because they've also been known as Pepsi Cola.
That's it. It's Pepsi.
Okay. I think with Michael Jackson, like he was doing something for Pepsi, but then his hair got lit on fire by accident.
Yeah, the pyrotechnic explosion, the story goes, went off too early, and and it burned his scalp, they say, and
Ooh.
it is believed that that was what led to the drug addictions that he struggled with for the rest of his life. At least that's what people say.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know the
Yeah.
whole story myself, so I can't say either way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that could be just a rumor, the whole addiction thing.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Next, this is a store chain, and the slogan is "Always low prices, always."
Now that one I know is Walmart because I also know that when they used that slogan, they used to have a mascot that was pretty much a smiley face.
Yeah. Do they still give out stickers like that too?
I don't know. I know they still have the greeters when you walk in, and I feel like they were the ones that usually gave those stickers out, but I don't know if they really do that anymore.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
don't know if
well,
they
it is Walmart. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if they would have stopped doing that because of COVID or something, but yeah, I don't remember
Yeah.
them doing that for a while.
Oh, yeah. All right. All right. And the next one is a delivery company, and the slogan is, "What can Brown do for you?"
What can Brown do for you?
Yeah.
My first initial thought is UPS.
That's it. Yep.
Okay, because their logo was like brown with yellow letters or yellowish orange. So,
And I think it still is. I think it's still the color of all those trucks.
right, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Next one is a major sports organization, and the slogan is, "I love this game."
I love this game. It's a
Yeah.
major sports organization.
And this organization has included players like Dwayne Wade, Shaquille O'Neal, Kobe Bryant, Michael
Okay,
Jordan.
so the NBA.
Yep.
Okay. And my first initial thought was the NFL, but I didn't think that sounded right. So I figured it was either NBA or the MLB.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. This is a TV network. Next one, TV network.
Mhm.
They used the slogan "First Kids Network."
First Kids Network.
And shows on this network have included Kenan and Kel, All That, Rocco's Modern Life, Hey Arnold.
Okay, I figured it was either Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network, but once you said Hey Arnold and Rocco, I believe those were Nickelodeon properties.
It is Nickelodeon, yep.
Okay.
All
Yeah, I
right.
figured it was one of those two because those two stations were huge in their heyday.
Yeah. All right. All right. Next one is a car company, and the slogan is "Grab life by the horns."
Well, the only car company I know that has something with horns in the logo is the Dodge Ram.
It is Dodge.
Okay.
Yep. All right. Next, we have a telecommunications or cell phone company, and their slogan once was "Your world delivered."
Okay, then it wouldn't be singular because theirs was raising the bar.
And this was the company that pretty much bought out Singular. And around that same time, I believe they started using this slogan. And it's also been used as the phone service for the Phone a Friend Lifeline on Millionaire.
It's not Sprint, is it?
Commercials, past commercials for this company, another clue, have starred celebrities like Gordon Ramsay, Mark Cuban, and Steve Harvey.
Okay, well, if it's not Sprint, I don't think it was T-Mobile. The only one I can think of other than those off the top of my head is Verizon.
It was AT&T.
Oh, that, of course I forgot about that one.
Yeah, I don't think it's doing as well anymore.
No, it doesn't have the best reputation, and honestly, a lot of the time I get scam calls from someone claiming they're from a phone company. They say they are from AT&T, not saying that's any points away from AT&T, but it certainly doesn't help.
Yeah, one other clue I didn't think about was they've merged with DirecTV, like one bought the other one out or something.
I want to say Direct bought them out, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know. They merged in some kind of way, I think.
Right. Kind of like how Sprint and T-Mobile fused.
Yeah. All right, the next one is an insurance provider that used this slogan, "Everything should be so easy."
Everything should be so easy. Okay.
All right, and the logo, it's famous for having an apple in its logo, and they recently used in their advertising an original song by a group called Walk Off the Earth.
Oh, I know Walk Off the Earth. They're an a cappella group.
Are they a cappella? I don't know. They don't sound like from the one other song I heard from them. From one other song, they didn't sound a cappella to me. Yeah, you're probably looking that up right now.
Yeah, I'm looking that up right now. It certainly shows one of them holding a guitar. I want to verify one thing here. Okay, so they do have a cappella abilities, but based on pictures I'm seeing, it looks like they do some instrumental stuff every once in a while. I said they were an a cappella group because I first found them myself when they did an a cappella cover of Taylor Swift with a guy known as Korean Effects, who's like really, really good at beatboxing.
All right. And the name of this insurance company is also a popular sports acronym.
Sports acronym.
Yeah. Yeah, like a title, an honor given to an athlete for like outstanding performance.
MVP?
Yes, MVP.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, all right. All right. I got one more, and it is another restaurant chain, and the slogan is Good Mood Food.
Good mood food. That one does sound at least vaguely familiar. I don't think it was Applebee's, because I think their old slogan was eating good in the neighborhood.
Yeah, similar sounding. Let's they have made items including the smokehouse brisket, the loaded curly fries, the Jamocha milkshake, and the regular roast beef.
See, once you said the smokehouse brisket, I know exactly what you were talking about because I used to work there. That being Arby's.
Yes, and that is the reason I picked out that one.
They've had, at least compared to other places, I feel like they've had more slogans than most other fast food restaurants, because they had that one. They had simply, I'm thinking Arby's, and now they have,
Yep.
we have the meats.
All right. All right. So overall, you did strongly. Yeah.
I was about to say, I think that's the best I've done on a quiz.
Yeah. Well, I think. I did my best to help make it easier, I think.
Which definitely was appreciated.
Yeah. Okay. As Jordan mentioned, we have another segment where we discuss news that bites and news that rocks, personal or article story news negative and positive.
Yep.
And what did you have that bites? Did you have anything for that?
Well, for news that bites, I figured I would just briefly bring up the elephant in the room, that being the whole thing going on right now between Russia and Ukraine.
Oh yeah, it's seems to be a hot topic of the current time.
Right, and it is a sad story. I won't talk about it too much because I know there's a lot of people who are suffering right now that probably don't want to hear or see any more about it than they already do. But it definitely is news that bites.
Yeah, well, yeah, it does seem like overall a criminal thing that's going on genocide, or people getting arrested for protesting. I do know. I don't know much of it. It seems like a complicated thing, but it does sound pretty negative.
It definitely is.
I found this article from a news station somewhere in I believe upstate New York, where I believe we are, Williamsville, which I believe is a Buffalo suburb, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah. One second. So this is coming from a station in Williamsville. Well, apparently a teacher at a school in that area has been suspended until further notice for a sort of thing that she did with a Spanish teaching assignment, where the students pretty much were given a homework assignment to translate messages I think from English to Spanish or the other way around.
Sure.
And one of the English sentences turned out to be, "You are Mexican and ugly," and another one, "You are pretty and American."
Yeah, I mean, I understand wanting to have assignments where you translate one way or the other, but those two sentences should not be used ever, especially together.
and I honestly don't know. I don't know oh, what this teacher was thinking, or where this idea was coming from, or well, whether she believes it. If she does, why, I don't know. But it's a problem.
My only thought or guess is that it could have been a weak attempt to try and sway the kids to start thinking like she might have. But I can't say for sure.
All right. What about something that rocks for you?
Well, I had originally wrote down that we had just undergone the start of the Winter Olympics, but this was around the time that we were struggling to get the recording process to work. So now what I have written down is that very recently I have acquired 2 separate jobs that I can actually do from home, thus pretty much anywhere. So that will definitely help me out significantly, financially speaking, if gas prices start to go even higher than they already have. So I'm set on that, and I'm very grateful for the people who have hired me for those jobs. And then the other thing I wrote was, I think I've brought this up before, especially in 1 or 2 of our previous episodes, but I think I've talked about a little bit how I am a bit of a competitive Smash Brothers player, and there's a convention in Virginia that I've attended a few times that is centered entirely around the franchise. And they just, well, for the last couple of years, they couldn't really do it the way they wanted because of COVID. So they either had a small event or nothing at all. And I just got the email the other day confirming they are bringing it back in full swing this year.
It does seem like things are moving forward with this pandemic, and maybe we could be close to this whole thing coming to an end. And I don't think anyone knows that for sure, but it looks like things are progressing, though.
Well, I can't say for sure one way or the other, but and I don't know what the status is on most of the other US states, but I know in our area they recently were saying that, I think it starts tomorrow too, they're going to start dropping some mask mandates in various public locations.
I did hear that March 1st, which is in a couple days, that they would possibly stop requiring masks in school and school district work environments.
Right.
And as I've mentioned before, probably on this podcast, I am working in a school district. That's my full-time job right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've had to wear a mask pretty much all day long on the job, which has not been the biggest inconvenience, but it is still, I think more freeing, or going to be more freeing when I don't have to do that anymore.
I mean, I will like how I'll have the choice as to whether or not to wear the mask. I think they're going to still strongly recommend it. I think for now I will keep the mask on because I don't know what everybody's status is. So it's hard to say that I trust everybody at this point. When things lighten up even further, maybe I'll reconsider. But for now, I will personally keep my mask on for a little bit longer. But I do appreciate having the choice.
Well, I do respect your decision. I think biblically there are some gray areas that not every Christian necessarily has to agree on. But in some areas, what everyone should do is what works for them. Yeah.
And I'm not trying to sway anybody to make the same decisions I have, but I'm just saying what I'm going to be doing and why.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So I put one thing that rocks that I came up with that I found out about a few weeks ago.
Okay.
Well, the Buffalo Bills season, like I mentioned in an earlier episode, had its disappointing end with their overtime loss to Kansas City in the playoffs.
Right.
However, the Bills quarterback Josh Allen had the opportunity to actually participate in a traditional pro amateur golf event called the AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am. It's pretty much an event where like professionals pair up with celebrities, like I think Justin Timberlake has done it a couple times. Ray Romano, I believe, was involved in this one.
Oh.
And Josh Allen was also part of this year.
Okay, I was not aware of this. This is actually really cool.
I think it's in a way it's a sign that he is respected or regarded as an overall good football player, because if he was doing really poorly at his own game, then he probably wouldn't have gotten this opportunity. But he gets to do this, and even though he hasn't had the most winning season yet, or hasn't even made a Super Bowl appearance, he's getting to do this special thing, and so that's a good sign that he is considered one of the best at his game.
I was about to say, many people have said that he's one of the better, if not the best thing to have happened to the Bills in recent years, because they hadn't even been to the playoffs in about 17, 18 years, something close to that. And then shortly after he comes along, they start doing a lot better, more consistently. And he, by doing this fundraiser golf thing that you're talking about, it's a good example of someone who is using their platform for something good and not just abusing their power, as it were.
Well, I don't know if there's any fundraising involved in this event, but I am at least glad for him to have the opportunity to, be acknowledged and recognized in this sort of way.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that covers everything for this time, and we will be back maybe next weekend if things are open enough. And in the meantime, share with us your thoughts, your answers to the questions we discussed, your thoughts on anything we've talked about, and keep up with our episodes on Facebook, Twitter, Google Podcast, Spotify, and Anchor.
And if you have suggestions for the future, we'd love to hear any of those, and at least in terms of topics that we could discuss. If you feel like there's something that you want to say on an episode, talk to us. We'll see what we can do. Let's see. But yeah, just having conversations is really nice. So if you have anything you'd like to tell us or ask us or anything, do not hesitate to reach out to us. We will do our very best to respond, and should anyone decide to, we look forward to hearing from you.
Keep the conversation going, be a part of the discussion. Enjoy our show, and we will be back hopefully soon. And until then, we are out. Thanks to everybody for playing this.
Keep adding more layers, everyone.